Ladies and gentlemen, live from Rialto, California, Mark Flores presents The Mark and Andre Show. Tonight we review Star Wars Rogue One, and we talk about animosities other countries have with the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, this is The Mark and Andre Show. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for tuning in to another great episode of the Mark and Andre Show. I am your host, Mark Flores, and the oddest thing happens today. So, I ended up watching Star Wars Rogue One, this spin-off series to, actually the spin-off movie to this new Star Wars dynasty that we have now in the 2010s. But something happened today where Andre has to deal with an emergency situation. Don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, he himself is fine, completely fine. He just wasn't able to attend the very well-known, critically acclaimed Mark and Andre show. But I am here, out of all people, I am here to give you guys a review on Star Wars Rogue One. And I'm also going to be discussing several other topics here tonight on the Mark and Andre show. But first I want to get down a couple of random thoughts that I had throughout the whole week here. Mainly, I was thinking about the animosity that other countries have with the United States. I want to briefly talk about this before I go into the main segment tonight. When I have various conversations with people regarding government, politics, etc., the one main thing that they always route to is war. Like war is this magical scapegoat where war isn't necessarily the answer, but it's more of the inevitability of what is going to happen. And this actually came into very bright focus with me last week on the Mark and Andre show with our special guests, Isaiah and Olajuwon, when we were talking about an attack on American soil. And it got me thinking. It had me thinking about this whole idea that us as a nation aren't necessarily invincible on American soil itself. And to my various critics that I had on the show last week, they on the other hand thought that an attack on American soil is extremely likely. And I think otherwise. I really do think otherwise. I think that the United States is at a position where we have a strategical land advantage, where the only way to come with an attack on us is either through the east or the west, and that's either entering by coast, either that or air landing in the middle of the United States, which isn't a good idea, unless you've seen that movie Red Dawn, where Russians magically showed up in the middle of the heartland and were able to perform an attack. Not the reboot, by the way, the older 80s Red Dawn with Patrick Swayze. I don't think that's possible. I don't think that an attack in any position that we have within the United States is ever possible. Yes, you could say that terrorist attacks can likely happen. Yes, that is true. But those are the most unexpected forms of attack. And in hand, they are the most cowardice. So, with less strategy, less impact, a terrorist attack is more likely to happen, but an invasion on U.S. soil from a different country, an opposing country for that matter, is very unlikely. I'm going to get back into it with that segment there, but before we go with that, let me tell you guys that Game Swappers is going to have two events, Saturday and Sunday respectively. We're going to be having a bar arcade night at the Finish Line Sports Bar and Grill. Starts at 8 o'clock. We'll be also hosting a Super Smash Bros. Brawl tournament. It's a 4-part tournament. And if you're there that night, we'll be able to explain in full detail what happens henceforth with that said tournament. It's a lot to explain, and I'd rather have it explained in person if you guys do attend. The cost for the bar arcade night is only $10. That $10 includes unlimited play on the various consoles that we have set up. That also includes your entry into the Smash Brothers Brawl tournament. So it's a win-win in that regard. You don't have to pay separately to attend this Super Smash Brothers Brawl tournament because it's all inclusive. So that's one benefit to there. The day after, we're going to be having Game Swappers is going to be having a Retro Respect event. And what Retro Respect basically entails, you are able to buy, sell, and trade with various vendors that have tables set up there at the Finish Line Sports Bar and Grill, located off White Avenue in Pomona, California. The Finish Line Sports Bar and Grill. So it'll be an outdoor event. There's the rain isn't a factor within this event because there's a tent as well, very big tent. You're able to buy, sell, and trade with various vendors. All have a few things to sell as well. And you'll be able to do that. It's free to attend. There's free parking for all events. And yeah, those are going to be the events there. And on top of these two other adverts, I'm going to be giving you the other commercial break here on the Mark and Andre Show. Hello, this is Mark Flores from the Mark F Podcast channel, here to let you know that this podcast episode is brought to you by Game Swappers. Come on down to Game Swappers, located at 4520 Holt Boulevard in Montclair, California, to buy, sell, and trade your current and retro video games from Nintendo Entertainment System to the PS4. Keep in mind that if you share any one of my podcast episodes through any form of social media, you'll get 10% off your entire purchase, or you'll get 10% more towards your retro game trade-ins. Follow Game Swappers on Instagram at GAMESWAPPERS. That's GAMESWAPPERS. Game Swappers. Buy, sell, and trade. And with that, we'll go into the Star Wars Rogue One movie review. Spoiler-free, as you all know. So, upon going to the actual movie event of Star Wars Rogue One, I was taking a little peek at the cast listing for this movie. And what I found was a very diverse selection of actors that really take this movie from a regular movie, but to a movie of epic proportions. There's a lot of actors, actresses within this movie that are very impressive to watch. You'll know each and every single one of these actors from various other movies. You'll be able to tell right away. That's one good point of this. There's a lot of experience, and the range of all these actors are very vast. And that's good to say. Not a lot of movies can share the same qualities as Rogue One has. Some might even say that even the Star Wars prequels, episodes 1 through 3, kind of weren't of that same factor. You had Samuel L. Jackson in the Star Wars prequels. You had Liam Neeson, great range as well. But then after that, after Ewan McGregor comes down, then you kind of fall by the wayside of every other actor that's along the lines of the casting of Rogue One. So with Star Wars Rogue One, we have Felicity Jones as Jyn Orso, Diego Luna as Captain Cassian Andor, Mads Mikkelsen from Hannibal, from the short-lived Hannibal prequels. He plays Galen Orso, Donnie Yen from Ip Man and various other martial arts movies. He plays Chirrut Imwe, Forrest Whitaker as Saw Gerrera, Ben Mendelsohn as the director, the villain of the of this whole movie here. And then, oh, actually, yes, I have director Orson Krenner. Then Jimmy Smits as Bail Organa. So I'll get in more detail with that as time goes on. But the main things I wanted to get out with Star Wars Rogue One, upon seeing it, the first couple of minutes, you're introduced to the fact that there's one shining quality of all the Star Wars films that is missing from this movie itself, and that is the fact that there's no title screen. There's not the famous Star Wars title screen that you're used to seeing in every other Star Wars movie. And why is that? Because this is the first of the many spin-offs that Star Wars is going to have, and with tradition of these movies, with tradition of the movies like A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, these all shared said chapters. This isn't necessarily a chapter in the Star Wars saga. So it doesn't have the very famous title screen, which comes at you with Star Wars and then proceeds with the title and then a brief summary of the movie you're about to watch. That's good to me. I thought that by them doing that, LucasArts was able to disassociate themselves with the Star Wars saga itself. And that's great, because now you have this film, along with the other spin-offs that come along with it. You have these films with their own identity. And with this movie, seeing it in its entirety, you're able to see that it does share its own identity. And the spin-offs and prequels that come from after this, like the Han Solo, the young Han Solo film, the Boba Fett film, the Obi-Wan Kenobi prequel, you're going to be seeing a lot of these movies share separate ties, share separate eras, stories, and that's good. And I like the fact that LucasArts was able to disassociate this movie from the very, I would say the very familiar. And that's always good to me. The other fantastic part about this movie is, like all these new Star Wars films, there's a lot more focus with the CGI and with the practical effects as well. This movie made every planet its own characteristic. Every planet that they visited, which in this movie that they visited a lot of planets. Every planet themselves had their own characteristic, had their own niche, and that's good to see. But with that, you have location sets that mirror these same characteristics. And unlike the Star Wars saga beforehand, the prequels, you didn't have that. All you had was a majority of people in interior sets with CGI in the background. And with a very good eye, you're able to tell that a majority of the scenes in the prequels were of CGI nature. This movie in particular didn't have that. You're able to see mountainous regions. You're able to see beaches. A lot of sets in the foreground, but in the background, then you do have the practical sets mixed in with the CGI. So you can't escape the fact that some of these scenes are a futuristic nature, so you're going to have to make up something in the background via CGI. There's no escaping that. It's just the inevitability that you have with telling a story of a space saga. It's what you have to deal with. But what they have with it, as far as the saga mixed in with its own spin-off, it needs to have its own identity, and this movie really pushes the envelope as far as mixing in practical sets with CGI. You could tell within this movie that a lot of focus was put within these sets. I also enjoyed the fact that they kind of strayed away from like these futuristic buildings, like how they did in the prequels. Because in the prequels, the exterior CGI backgrounds, you're able to tell a mile away that this is fake. But what Rogue One did, and what I really want to praise Rogue One for doing, is that the inside and outside shots were all practical. There's nothing that you couldn't do with these scenes. I mean, everything, there was a rocky region, there was a mountainous beach region, so you're able to mix in some palm trees, some beaches, and in the first act, you're able to include a mountainous region with a couple of prop sets and stuff like that. So there's a lot of emphasis on this impressive visual effects, impressive CGI. I think that the storyboard comes to life within this film. And I was mentioning this kind of fact to people at Videotown, which is located right next to Game Swappers, located in the same store. I was talking to them and I was discussing that. And this was in terms to like animated films, but I'm going to wrap this example right up. In animated films, the guy who creates the storyboard is essentially the director. Because the storyboard, when you illustrate a storyboard, you're able to conjure and make 100% of what you want to visualize within the movie. There's nothing holding you back. There's not going to be any productions it's going to hold you back. There's not going to be any visual effects you're not going to be able to produce. And I think in terms of Rogue One, I believe that with the vision that they had in mind to manipulate the practical and the CGI together, you're able to make a storyboard that is along the lines of an animated feature where you know that you can push the envelope, you can visualize everything that you want to do and produce it to the extent of what you want. There's not a lot of movies in modern day that can match this similar trait, because then you have various issues to deal with where maybe the practical set that you want to use isn't available, etc., etc. So you could tell by the vast, luscious landscapes that they've used within Star Wars or Rogue One, you'll be able to be immersed into this environment that the storyboard artist was envisioning 100% of the time. You're able to feel the fact that you're in the cockpit of an X-Wing fighter. You're in the cockpit of a TIE fighter. You feel like you're over the shoulder in some shots with Captain Cassian Andor or Jyn Orso, whether it comes to the scenes that you're watching. So, real big props to the visual effects in Star Wars or Rogue One. Another thing to complement the CGI stuff, the CGI conversation that we're having here, is that Star Wars Rogue One was able to bring an old character that wasn't really supposed to be back, essentially. And Governor Tarkin, played by Peter Cushing of Van Helsing fame in the old 70s horror flicks, was able to have a couple of scenes. And you're probably asking yourself, well, Mark, I think that's very impossible to do, because Peter Cushing has been dead for a little while. And I'll simply reply to that it's not, because they did it in Star Wars Rogue One. Governor Tarkin, of course, is a very integral part of the Imperial force, the Imperial forces, the forces that are against the rebellion. So the way that you see Peter Cushing's Governor Tarkin character, you're able to see that, wow, this guy, whoever's playing him, has a CGI model on top of him, but wow, he looks exactly like Peter Cushing. It looked like Peter Cushing just came back, resurrected from the grave, and was able to be played in a Star Wars movie. And the first time you end up seeing him, and this is this isn't essentially a spoiler, because as long as you were with Star Wars from the beginning, watching the older movies, you're able to know that Governor Tarkin is an essential part of the Death Star, is an essential part of the Empire. So this isn't necessarily a spoiler per se. They resurrected Governor Tarkin, and that's something to say. That is breaking ground between bringing old characters back and actually bringing characters that have passed away too early. Take Paul Walker from Fast 7. He was able to be modeled, to the similar characteristics of his brother, and with the same respects to Governor Tarkin as Peter Cushing as Governor Tarkin. You're able to see that they're able to model old people that shouldn't be in movies like this in 2016. That's impressive to say. So now what this does, it opens several windows for various movies. It's going to open a whole couple of storylines for the Han Solo prequel, the Obi-Wan Kenobi prequels. So this is going to be breaking ground for a lot of that. And that's good, because you can cast someone that kind of looks like Peter Cushing, but if you guys Google search Peter Cushing right now, you'll kind of see that this Peter Cushing himself actually has characteristics that are very rare to have. I mean, he has a very distinct look to him. Not a lot of people can just walk up and be like, yeah, I kind of look like Peter Cushing. Let's just film Rogue One right now. It's very hard to do that. But with the technology that we're allowed here in 2016, the role of Governor Tarkin now essentially can be played by anybody only if you are able to model, only if you're able to model the similar characteristics via CGI. Now, there was some odd things when you looked at Governor Tarkin's character. You could tell for a couple of sudden motions that this wasn't an actual person. Some CGI is frame by frame, and the quality is very good. I'm not, this isn't no rip onto Governor Tarkin's look in this movie. It's just there's sometimes things that you see in the facial enunciations where he enunciates a couple of words, and then you are automatically looking at that. And then when you focus in on that, you're kind of straying yourself away from the story. Slight distraction at the end of the day. But for them to do what they did, as far as bringing back an old character, it is a lot of props to the special effects teams with this movie. I think you might get a few visual effects nominees tossed their way. Probably even an award, probably an Oscar for costume design, because a lot of the set pieces and a lot of the wardrobes were very accurate to that of A New Hope. Big homage to A New Hope. As far as how everyone looked within this film. Looking at everyone within this film is like a throwback to watching A New Hope, but watching a version of A New Hope, not necessarily the story itself, but the same era of A New Hope. You're able to envision yourself in a world where this is kind of what they wanted A New Hope to be, but they had a various amount of limitations. In 1974, you couldn't film you couldn't film space epics to a certain degree without making it look kind of out of the mix per se. But now, with what you have with Star Wars Rogue One, you have a lot of allusions to Imperial destroyers, TIE fighters, AT-ATs, AT-STs, the Death Star, stormtroopers that look like the older stormtroopers but with the rehash. It all looks great. It's just think about this movie as one giant Easter egg, because you're able to see a lot of things within this movie that you yourself were able to like within A New Hope and the Star Wars prequels. Another big props about this movie, another good point about this movie, is that it was a good segue into A New Hope. The third act to the end, we're able was able to take you from Rogue One and then slightly bring you along the lines of from Rogue One to A New Hope. And that's great. I thought when I was in the theater, I was like, wow, so this goes to here. And I was linking up all the the characters to where, to which, and when. And that's you don't get that in a lot of prequels. You don't get a lot of notices and homages nowadays. I think that some prequels miss the ball a little bit as far as connecting things. I think sometimes the connections are either too quick or not quick enough. But you're able to see... Wow, it's really pouring outside there. You can hear it. You're able to see that this movie was a great segue to A New Hope. You could tell that this immediately happened where Princess Leia has to get this info into R2-D2 and then give it to Obi-Wan. So it's all great to see within Star Wars Rogue One. And one more good point to bring up as far as Rogue One goes, there was a commanding presence of most of the actors. I felt that Forrest Whitaker's character, Saw Gerrera, impressive, but he has a very limited amount of screen time. Mads Mikkelsen as the father to Jyn Orso, played by Felicity Jones. Galen Orso, his name. I thought he himself plays the role of being a humble person really well. And seeing him in the beginning of his career when he actually played a bad guy in the James Bond, I don't know whether it was Casino Royale or I think it was Quantum of Solace where he played a bad guy. But yeah, you could tell that did a great job. Mads Mikkelsen had a few moments in there where you kind of feel his pain as far as what he has to do in order for the plan that they have set up in this movie to go ahead. Diego Luna as Captain Cassian Andor did a great job for the role that he had. Was Diego Luna, if you guys haven't seen any of his movies, I recommend Criminal with him and John C. Reilly. I also recommend Diego Luna in the movie Casa de Mi Padre. It's a comedy with Will Ferrell. I think it's very funny. But Diego Luna definitely shows his range. He plays a concerned captain within the Rebel Alliance that has his own agenda to complete within this movie. Donnie Yen, and if you guys enjoy Donnie Yen, I recommend that you watch this movie solely for that fact. You don't have to like Star Wars for any which reason, it doesn't matter. But for the people that enjoy Donnie Yen, like myself and like my co-host who isn't with us right now, Andre, we both enjoy Donnie Yen. To see Donnie Yen in a big budget Star Wars movie like this is one of the biggest payoffs to liking someone as cool as Donnie Yen. Donnie Yen plays a character called Chirrut Imwe, basically a blind man that was supposed to protect one of the temples that housed the crystal that powers up the Death Star, and he's blind, but he is so in tune with the Force. Not so in tune the fact that he's a Jedi, but in tune to the effect that he is able to know where to be at, know what to do at which moment. And it's, the one drawback that he has is that he's blind, but he's able to capitalize on that in this movie. We also have Jimmy Smits reprising his role as Bail Organa from the prequels. And the droid, one thing I want to tell you guys is that the droid in this movie is probably one of the most enjoyable droids I've ever seen in a Star Wars movie. It's the most impressive droid. Because C-3PO, you enjoy C-3PO for what he is. He's a very nervous wreck. He always is a pessimistic droid. But the droid that they use within this, within Rogue One, very sarcastic, hilarious. The only thing I could tell you, watching some of the jokes wrap up with the droid in the mix is very funny to see. It's extremely amusing. And for what I have as far as the review goes on Rogue One, I mean that's a majority of what I could tell you as far as keeping it spoiler free. A general synopsis of what this is that Jyn Orso, played by Felicity Jones, has to go find out the origins. Well, not necessarily the origins. She has to go find her father, and the father is the key to defeating the Empire, and is the key to defeating the Death Star. So this is just the origin events of what leads up to A New Hope. How did they acquire the plans to finding the weak point within the Death Star? That is basically what Rogue One is. And for what it is as a whole, this movie is great. I don't want to say that it goes up with The Force Awakens. I know a lot of people are trying to put this above The Force Awakens, but it's not. It's its own identity. You stack this movie with a bunch of war epic movies, then you're talking. Because now it's in its own region, because now you have a sci-fi war movie about a rebellion going inside armed forces and overthrowing them to then get plans for the Death Star. That's great. It's great to see. There's also a couple of things that we have to point out within this movie that aren't really practical. And if you guys have seen Deep Impact, or if you guys have seen Armageddon, and you go watch Rogue One, you'll see what I mean. There's a couple of scenes within Rogue One where you have to suspend your disbelief, like I mentioned before to other movie reviews that I've done. You have to suspend your disbelief, and once you do that, you then disassociate yourself from the movie. All in all, you do not pay attention. You can't do that with movies of this magnitude. Your full focus has to be in. A movie that had no problem of keeping yourself focused within from start to finish, The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight Rises. You're in there at the edge of your seat from time to time. I'm not trying to say that Rogue One doesn't do that, because Rogue One definitely does do that. But once you see these obvious things that shouldn't happen the way they do in this movie, once you see that, you have to take it back and be like, okay, I have to take off my realism glasses, and I have to see this movie for what it is. And there's only luckily there's only two times where this instance where it just happens. There's only two times, so that's great to see. Overall, the movie itself is very enjoyable. It's a great action adventure. I think that there's not really a lot of twists within this movie. It's pretty much A to B to C. Realistically, there's not enough emphasis on twists. There's not enough of that. But a lot of people don't go to action adventure movies just for the sole thing of a twist. Twists are good within movies, but only if they're done well. Obvious twists suck. Twists that are too vague and complex suck. But a deliberate twist that actually is real sensible is always a good payoff. There's not a lot of twists within this movie. If you're looking for like the twist, like a Shyamalan kind of twist, you're not going to find it here in Rogue One. It's a very good action adventure, kind of like a war flick towards the second to the third act. I enjoyed it. I liked Rogue One. I'm not going to put it above The Force Awakens. I definitely won't do that. It's definitely above the Clone Wars movie. There's Episode 2 and Episode 1. But then after that, it falls short of Episode 3, because I think Episode 3 is a very action-intense Star Wars movie. So I don't like ranking things as far as what we have here as a movie review goes. But overall, I give Star Wars Rogue One 8 out of 10. It's a very enjoyable flick. You guys will love it. If you guys are in tune with what happens in the Star Wars universe as far as the first original 3 episodes go, episodes 4, 5, and 6, you'll definitely enjoy a Rogue One, because it's a segue into how the Rebel Alliance was able to acquire the plans for the Death Star. Great movie. I liked it. That's all I got to say. So the next thing I had on the docket here, I wanted to make sure that everyone pays their respects to a very good sitcom actor of the 80s. Alan Thicke died of a heart attack at about 69 years old. 69, some odd that. He was a father of Robin Thicke, the R&B artist. He's a hell of a guy. Growing Pains was a sitcom that a lot of people enjoyed back in the 1980s. I myself didn't have the liberty of watching Growing Pains. I was more of a Family Matters, Full House kind of guy. So I didn't really watch Growing Pains. But a lot of people told me Growing Pains is a good flick. A good sitcom. I was able to see Alan Thicke in the later part of his career when he was pitching infomercials, but still, for his age, very handsome man. You could tell where Robin Thicke gets his looks from. He looks dead on like his father. Rest in peace, Alan Thicke. And one little gripe that I wanted to bring up, and I just don't like the fact that people are like trying to encompass a whole year as far as being responsible for being the Grim Reaper. 2016 took another one, or, death happens. That's one main thing that's one main thing you know how life goes. Death happens. You have to accept it. You don't want to blame a year for being the culprit of some person dying of old age, like Florence Henderson. Florence Henderson from the Brady Bunch played the maid in Brady Bunch. She died at 85. Yet people were trying to say that 2016 took another one. No. People in their 80s aren't really in the best of health. Can't associate a year with someone's death. I don't know. I don't really think that's logical, because thousands upon thousands of people die every day. It's just the way of life. Anyway, I'm just rambling at this point. Another good point that I wanted to bring up to you guys here on the Mark and Andre show is that Unsolved Mysteries is going to be streamed on Amazon. So for the people around my age, late 20s, you'll be able to have the privilege of watching Unsolved Mysteries, also known as the show with probably one of the most haunting musical intros in all of Lifetime's quality programming. If you guys don't remember Unsolved Mysteries, it was basically Robert Stack was narrating a bunch of mysteries that were unsolved, but with the voice of Robert Stack alongside of haunting music intros. It goes hand in hand on why this really scared a lot of people to watch. Unsolved Mysteries' his intro is scary, and especially if you watch a mystery that has someone right by your neighborhood that's still on the loose. I remember one time there was a serial killer that was along the way in Rialto, California, but they were able to find him. They didn't have an update in the first part of the show, so they said he was still at large, and the last place that they looked is that he lived around Rialto, California. So for a couple of weeks, I was always on the lookout for some guy who kind of had like the Santa Claus description with like a big beard, old white guy. So I was always on the lookout. I was always on the lookout for the Santa Claus lookalikes for a little bit. Luckily, a couple of years later, they did an update on that same thing, and they were able to capture this guy. So, Unsolved Mysteries is going to start being streamed on Amazon. Make sure you guys tune into that. And one more point that I wanted to make. Let's talk about one thing. And that's the whole Russia-United States thing. A lot of you guys may or may not know is that there's a lot of rumblings within the political world where a lot of people think that the United States is going to go at war, starting World War III with Russia. And if you buy into that whole idea that Russia is going to just load up the troops and start attacking the shores of San Francisco, load up and attack the shores of New York City, you are very incredibly wrong. You have to understand that there's so many factors that go into initiating a war. There's so many factors that go into the collateral damage of a war that not only an attack of that magnitude is very incalculable, but it's just at the same notion of it being incalculable, it's also improbable. If Russia were going to attack the shores of Los Angeles to then initiate World War III, my question is to you, why would it do that? There would be no point. There would be no reason to do that. There would be no reason to load up troops and attack the shores like the United States did to the shores of Normandy during World War II. It would be pointless. There would be no reason to do that at all. Why? Because Russia, the United States, we got nuclear weapons. That's our first resort when it comes to an attack of this nature. If someone decides to attack our shores, we have an answer of nuclear proportions that ends everything. You set off a nuke in the heart of Moscow, there will be millions upon millions upon millions of people dead. It's unlikely. You just can't, that looming threat of the United States having a nuke haunting over everyone else because we essentially are the world police. I don't think any country wants to have that much blood on their hands because they decided, hey, let's just invade the United States. It's very improbable, guys. And I know there's a lot of young and ambitious people that think that war is likely to happen in this day and age, but look, we haven't had a world war of this nature since the 50s, the 40s and 50s. World War II, we're almost at the 75 years of not having a realistic, big-time, multi-countries, a lot of countries involved war. And we're going to be far from that for a long time. Yes, there's going to be a lot of, there might be a terrorist attack here and there within U.S. soil. But I'll go into that a little later when I start talking about that. But an actual old school, let's get the troops suited up, let's start doing drafts. All that bullshit is done with. We as Americans have came across this thing called logic, sensibility, where we know that doing something like that isn't the most logical, the most sensible, the most practical thing to do. That's why we invented nuclear weapons, to prevent major catastrophes where people die in the hundreds of thousands for a war for essentially no reason. And this isn't taking anything away from people of the armed forces the Marines, Navy, the Army, National Guard. I respect every single one of you guys for doing what you do, for being out in the Middle East, fighting an enemy that you essentially don't really necessarily know. For the people of the National Guard protecting our bases, for the people in the National Guard protecting our border. You guys are always out there putting it on the line. For the people all across doing special ops missions. I mean, it just, the list goes on and on. I respect every single one of you guys for doing what you do to keep this country safe, to make sure that no one attacks this country. And you know what the most unfortunate thing of them all is that a lot of people don't know, here's a small fact for some of you guys, is that we have not necessarily ended the war in Vietnam, but we're kind of at like this standstill. So with that, we still have one looming threat, and that's North Korea. But it's not a looming threat as far as from a war perspective, but it's more along the lines of this. See, North Korea got particularly smart about the way they fight the United States. See, they don't really fight the United States as from a military perspective, yet they're able to fight where it hurts us Americans from a consumer perspective, from us taking care of the bare necessities with buying things. And I'm telling you this, North Korea has this one special gift. Amongst other things, they like to counterfeit money. And not only do they make counterfeit money really well, but they make it to an extent where they can fool a lot of people. If you could fool someone into believing that your $100 bill is an actual legitimate $100 bill, then you have control. You have full control of the economy at that point. North Korea leads every other country that specializes in counterfeiting United States money by a very unprecedented margin. So just make sure you guys watch out next time to where, say if you try to buy something with cash, you end up with a fake $5 bill from North Korea. That's one thing you gotta watch out for. But that's the most impressive thing to think about, is that the North Koreans have found a more effective way to affect us, not necessarily from a militaristic standpoint, but now from a financial standpoint, to where they might stop you from buying stuff, or they may buy stuff with, they might buy an abundance of goods with counterfeit money. And I say they as not necessarily North Koreans themselves, but the people that, get these counterfeit dollar bills sent to them in particular. It's one thing you guys got to watch out for. It's not really the United States or in Russia you have to essentially worry about. And then another thing that I wanted to point it out too is that there's still people out there in the Middle East, still in U.S. bases, protecting the U.S. bases themselves. But one thing that really plagued my mind for a long time, after I became a little more savvy when it came to finding out what happens in war, what really happens in war, like what really goes down. When you go back to the history books, you'll find that World War II, we had enemies. We had the Japanese, and we also had the Germans. World War I, we had the us facing the Axis powers. We had enemies. We had actual enemies with bases, actual enemies within certain countries. We had actual enemies in certain territories. Now, with the war on terror, which suspiciously happened after 9/11, when George Bush initiated the Patriot Act to make sure that we might have to tap people's phones just in case for freedom. Or I'm more talking along the lines of the war on terror as far as a militaristic standpoint now. When a private goes with his or her gun into a battlefield, this war on terror is probably one of the only wars since the Vietnam War to where we don't know who our enemy is. See, in Vietnam, there was an issue between the 38th parallel to where there was a lot of confusions within the North and the South Koreans. A lot of United States infantries fell victim to being rused by a bunch of North Koreans, saying that they were South Koreans and getting put in traps, etc., etc. See, that's the time where we weren't really familiar. Now with the war on terror, we're especially not familiar with the enemy that we fight. See, because the enemy itself, various terrorist groups like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, these guys don't necessarily run territories. Yes, they do inherit oil rigs or they inherit oil plants to where they can actually manufacture and fund. Yes. But to literally know who your enemy is, it's not a country. It's not a dictator with a crew, a posse behind him. No, it's this, to a certain degree, an imaginary person with imaginary thugs alongside. And I'm gonna tell you like this, is that it's very unfortunate that we've been persuaded by the Bush administration we've been persuaded by the Bush administration to believe that there is nothing but terrorists within Saudi Arabia, within Iraq, Iran, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Turkey. Just full of terrorists. Like every time you think of the Middle East, every time you think of countries alongside those regions, you're going to associate them with being terrorists. And you can't do that because not a lot of people within the Middle East are like that. You know, the religion of Islam itself very much promotes peace. It's a very peaceful religion. It's a lot of the majority of people of the United States and the world, similar, are predominantly Muslims. You know, it's hard for you to try to downplay a country themselves and to immediately associate them with being ISIS radicals and that they're going to blow some shit up. Like every Muslim is going to blow some shit up. That's very offensive, and not only is it very offensive, but it's also very inconsiderate to the people that try to go about their everyday lives within the United States or within countries of that nature. It gets me upset. It gets a lot of people that I know that are Muslim upset as well. So next time you go around thinking that Russia is the bad guy or someone else is, you know, there's this new enemy afoot, you know. One position that we don't really look for in situations like this is that we ourselves have been a victim of being in a position where we're a nation where we're able to have a lot of rights and we're able to do a lot of things that a lot of all these these countries that follow Sharia law or these other countries that are just mostly dictatorships, they're not able to have the same luxuries as us. See, if I did a podcast where I voiced my opinion about North Korea, and I started preaching anti-Korean sentiments about Kim Jong-un, etc., I wouldn't be here. I would be dead by the end of the week. They would find my podcast because the internet's controlled, and they would find where I live because everyone's registered, and they know where the hell I am because after I'm 18, I have to serve 2 years in their army. They'll know where you're at. And I'd be dead. In the United States, I have the liberty to have this podcast, and I have the liberty to voice my opinion about the government that I'm paying my taxes for. And not a lot of people can appreciate that. So the next time you guys think about World War III, don't think about World War III itself. That whole imagery where we're going to be going against another country in the trenches and shit. That doesn't play anymore. That doesn't happen. We haven't had a war like that in 75 years, and I don't really like to count the Vietnam War, because that was just one of these unfortunate wars that we shouldn't have been a part of. Same thing with Desert Storm. Same thing with the War on Terror, and just unfortunate, very unfortunate incidents. That's one thing we have to make sure. If ever you look at the news and wonder, you worry about Russia, you don't need to worry about them. What you have to worry about is doing the best you can within your whole family. What you do within yourself. Be the best. If you could be the best that you can be without worrying about what's happening overseas or what's happening politically. I'm not saying you shouldn't you shouldn't be educated in politics. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying is that to buy into what a lot of political pundits say, to buy into what people think might happen with wars and things of that nature. It's just, you can't take that very seriously. You have to remember that political pundits are nothing short of being political entertainment. So always just keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. It's one thing you have to do. What other topics do we have here on the Mark and Andre podcast show? Nothing really. As far as what we have here, there's nothing that we have on the docket as far as it goes, except for one more thing. With me going solo on this Mark and Andre podcast show tonight, I want to let you guys know, and I don't really speak on it very often, but I want to tell you guys this, is that throughout doing these various podcasts, whether it's Retro Collecting 101, whether it's pay-per-review wrestling podcast, whether it's the Mark and Andre show, the only film, entertainment, conspiracy theory podcast on Spreaker.com, I always want to let you guys know that I definitely do appreciate anyone and everyone that listens to these various podcasts. It's very humbling. It makes me do what I do a lot better, because I know that there's going to be people listening. I try my best to make sure that I put out quality programming every Friday or every other time I do a wrestling podcast or every time I do a Retro Collecting 101 podcast, because I like doing it. I'm not, it's very important for someone to voice their opinions on matters such as current events, such as conspiracy theories, and such as film and entertainment, because a lot of people are missing perspective. I listen to other podcasts along the way too. I mean, I'm not the end-all be-all as far as podcasts go, nor do I listen to my own. The only time I listen to my own podcast is to criticize and to make sure, what can I do to improve? For the various people that have amassed 7,000, almost 8,000 plays for the Mark and Andre show and every other podcast on the Mark and Andre podcast, the Mark Flores podcast channel, it's impressive. Someone within the United States or globally, as the statistics prove, someone's actually clicked in and listened in to an episode. And it's hard to try to take that all in every time you try to explain it on this show. Because every time that I try to, it really gets me welled up, and it gets me to think that, a lot of people actually, give a damn about what people want to hear as far as conspiracies go. I don't really think of myself as this end all be all as far as podcasts go. No, I try to work hard to bring quality programming, yes. But the fact of the matter is that I want to make sure that people are informed, that people are getting news from a different news source other than CNN, other than MSNBC, Fox. I like conspiracy theories. And a lot of people don't necessarily delve into them because they haven't been proven by news networks. But to really believe, or to really go in and try to think about the fact that a lot of news companies don't really like showing all the news, that shows you something. The immediate moment that you see something being censored on television is already a red flag that if they've already censored something on television, whether it's a visual thing or an audio thing, then what else are they hiding? What else are they not showing you in its full entirety? That's why I researched the JFK assassination. That's why I researched the ancient astronaut theory, 9/11. I mean, there's always questions that need to be answered that go unanswered with these news events. And you guys seek those same answers. And that's why some of you guys tune in, which is great for me. It's just keeping everyone well informed. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to this very short Mark and Andre podcast show. I wish I can go much further, but without the back and forth of my co-host, I'm not able to. But other than that, I was glad to give you guys a review on Star Wars Rogue One. I was glad to talk about this false animosity between Russia and the United States. I just wanted to make that perfectly clear. If you have to understand that the two countries' leaders are able to meet face to face and talk, that there's no animosity. There's no, actual wars going on within those said countries themselves. Short little point that I wanted to make there, but I was glad to let you guys know about the false animosity between Russia and the United States. Rest in peace, Alan Thicke. And then you can also catch Unsolved Mysteries on the Amazon, I think, Hulu or Amazon Video, whatever they have. I want to thank you guys for tuning into the Mark and Andre podcast show. I'm going to leave you guys with the commercial spot, and we'll see you guys next time. Hello, this is Mark Flores from the Mark F Podcast channel, here to let you know that this podcast episode is brought to you by Game Swappers. Come on down to Game Swappers, located at 4520 Holt Boulevard in Montclair, California, to buy, sell, and trade your current and retro video games from Nintendo Entertainment System to the PS4. Keep in mind that if you share any one of my podcast episodes through any form of social media, you'll get 10% off your entire purchase, or you'll get 10% more towards your retro game trade-ins. Follow Game Swappers on Instagram at GAMESWAPPERS. That's GAMESWAPPERS. Game Swappers. Buy, sell, and trade.